Consciousness is one of those words we all use, but rarely stop to define. We say someone is conscious when they are awake, when they respond, when they seem present. But what are we really talking about? Is consciousness about being alert, having thoughts, feeling pain? Scientists, philosophers, doctors, and psychologists all try to define it. Each has a piece of a puzzle, but none have the whole picture. Let's start with the most familiar definition, our everyday intuitive sense of what it means to be conscious. Someone is conscious when they're awake, when they respond, when they look back at us with intention. This view blends together awareness, alertness, memory, and agency, and assumes they all come as a package. But in real life, they often don't. We can dream but not move, or appear empty yet still be fully aware. Our intuition is useful, but vague, circular, and often misleading. Medicine builds on that intuition and turns it into protocol. In clinical settings, consciousness is assessed using the Glasgow Coma Scale, developed in the 1970s by Teasdale and Janet. It scores patients based on eye-opening, verbal response, and movement, with 15 indicating full alertness and 3 suggesting deep coma. But behavior isn't always the whole story. In 2006, neuroscientist Adrienne Owen asked a vegetative patient to imagine playing tennis, and her brain responded just like a healthy volunteer's, lighting up in the supplementary motor area. She couldn't move or speak, but she was there. Clinical tools are essential, but they can miss the experience happening beneath the silence. Neuroscience goes deeper into the brain itself. It searches for neural correlates of consciousness, or NCCs, the minimum brain activity needed for a specific experience. Researchers like Christoph Koch, Stanislas Dehaene, and Giulio Tononi have led major theories, each aiming to explain how consciousness might arise. Global workspace theory. Consciousness happens when information becomes globally available, not just processed locally, but broadcast to multiple brain regions for coordination, reflection, and reporting. Integrated information theory. A system is conscious to the extent that its parts are both differentiated and interconnected. The more it cannot be reduced without losing information, the higher its phi, its measure of integration. Recurrent processing theory. Consciousness doesn't require a central spotlight. It emerges when sensory areas reprocess their inputs through local feedback loops, a kind of echo that turns perception into awareness. These models offer architecture, but none explain the most important thing. Why do any of these patterns feel like something? And that's where philosophy steps in, to ask the question science can't. In 1974, Thomas Nagel famously asked what it is like to be a bat. You could know everything about a bat's brain and still not know what it's like from the inside. David Chalmers called this the hard problem of consciousness. Not what consciousness does, but why it exists. Frank Jackson's Mary's Room thought experiment shows that knowing every fact about color doesn't compare to the experience of seeing red for the first time. And then there is Daniel Dennett, who argues the opposite, that consciousness is a narrative illusion, a clever construction with no central experiencer. Philosophy doesn't offer a model, but it reminds us what can't be ignored, the inner subjective feel of experience. Psychology brings us back to behavior, but with a cognitive lens. It studies how consciousness enables functions, attention, memory, decision-making, and the self model. Working memory and attention are seen as key signatures of consciousness. But studies in blindsight reveal that we can react to things even when we are not aware of seeing them. Psychologists like Bernard Baars, Michael Gazzaniga, and Thomas Metzinger study how the brain filters and integrates information, and suggest that even the sense of self might be a mental construction. Psychology explains what consciousness does, but often leaves open what it is. Each field captures something real. Neuroscience gives us mechanisms, philosophy gives us meaning, psychology gives us function, medicine, measurement, and common sense gives us the language we live in. But each one also misses something vital. The picture is always partial, even when the theory feels complete. What if we are not looking at one phenomenon, but many tangled together? Maybe consciousness isn't a single thing to define, but a constellation of traits. Wakefulness, awareness, emotion, memory, intention, selfhood. And maybe these don't always appear together. Maybe we've tried too hard to draw a line between conscious and not, when we should be mapping gradients. In that sense, this isn't a video about certainty. It's an invitation to stay with the question, because the edges of consciousness might not be a boundary, but a blur. In the next episode, what it is like to be a bot. We'll explore subjectivity and why some say science may never fully touch the inside of experience.